before Öcalan's arrest. He said the PKK movement has reached a dead end and it'll be very difficult for it to survive following what's happened to its leader. But looking at those demonstrations in central London and in fact around the world, one gets the impression that Öcalan's lieutenants are indeed still very much in power, still very much in presence and still very much coordinating campaigns across the world. Well, at the scene we have two reporters. We have Emma Hurd on the ground and on the roof we have Chris Roberts. Chris, do you detect any sign of any other sorts of movements from your vantage point?
No, I'm afraid not. It does seem to be the stalemate that we've had for the past 3 days at the moment. There is a little bit of police activity. A couple of motorcyclists have just gone down the side road next to where I am. That's obviously a sealed off. Local residents are not allowed to drive their cars anywhere around here at the moment. They're having to come in on foot. But outside the embassy itself, basically there are just a large police presence. Obviously the negotiators are in contact somehow with those inside, possibly on the telephone. But basically people are standing around waiting for this to end.
Indeed, and we don't know, Chris, do we, whether or not this might end in the next few minutes or it might go on for another few hours?
No, but I think the Kurds want to sort of show the world that they are organised in this, and they have told us that this protest is about to come to an end. And I think their credibility would be damaged if it does drag on. So I think even though it hasn't exactly kept the timetable we hoped, they were of course supposed to come out at 1 o'clock, I don't get the feeling this is going to drag on for another night or anything like that, because I believe their protest, their statement, their cause has been highlighted. They're happy with that, and they want to come out in a peaceful, an organised way to show the world that they're not the terrorists that Turkey claims the Kurdish people to be.
We know, Chris, that there has been a constant dialogue between the people inside the embassy and the police and authorities outside. One wonders whether the sticking point may be the fact that they've demanded, as a condition of their leaving the embassy, that they are allowed to speak to journalists, because we don't know yet whether or not the police have granted them that wish.
No, absolutely. If it takes that to end this siege, then possibly the police will agree to it. But it would be a very difficult thing for the authorities to allow. This has been obviously an illegal act. Crimes have been committed here. And to allow the protesters to make some kind of triumphant media statement, given the extremely sensitive political nature of this problem, might not be something that the authorities wish to allow. Well, I'm sure there are negotiations going on with the Home Office, for instance, over what to do. The protesters do want to, as you say, come out and make a statement to the media, obviously along the same lines as those outside the embassy, that they feel the Kurdistan cause is a just and right one. But to do that could be interpreted, certainly possibly by Turkey, as the British authorities in some way capitulating to the demands of people who committed an illegal act.
May I jump in here?
Yes, Hajir.
Fortunately for the local people, the Greek embassy, which we are watching now, is not on a main road. It's in a crescent off the main road. And this morning I saw that traffic was moving rather well along Holland Park Avenue itself. So it has been cordoned off, yes, but most of the local people also, because they do not look Kurdish, they were able to pass police cordons rather easily. They stopped me, the police.
I was going to say, I expect you had some trouble,
yeah, yes, they were very nice, of course, but they questioned me, whereas the local people, they just waved through.
Well, one person who also managed to get through the cordon is our reporter Emma Hurd, who's down on the ground there. And Emma, one of the features, of course, of the people that we're seeing down there is that many of them are quite young and obviously feel a great affinity with this Kurdish identity, as Hajir was saying, a lost people almost.
Yes, that's right. It's a people without a homeland, really, I think, raising their fists here. I've just been handing, what I was reading there was press release from the Kurdistan Information Centre, which I was just skimming through as you came to me. Basically, the thrust of this is that the battle goes on. So they believe that their military battle has right behind it, has justice behind it, and they say that they'll continue despite the capture of their leader. But whole families have been involved in this protest, from very young children to the elderly, and they're determined to keep it that way. They say it is an issue which concerns all Kurdish people, and every one of these people have to be concerned with their right to a homeland.
Indeed, these are families there, not hardline demonstrators or protesters.
I think there's a mixture. I think some of these people are used to demonstrating. I've spoken to a few of them who said that they've demonstrated in Trafalgar Square before for several weeks. But others have come here for the first time. This is their first demonstration. Young children here who perhaps don't understand the history of the Kurdish issue. And clearly they've come here, they've been educated, they've met other Kurdish people who have spoken to them about their cause. And really it is a cause which is spanning the generations. Every new person which is born into the community learns about the history of Kurdistan, their fight for a homeland, and protests like this help to cement really relationships between the community here in Britain. I can tell you that there is some police movement behind me. We thought there was going to be a statement there a few minutes ago. It looks like that's now gone away. I don't know whether there's any movement at the embassy as yet. Suddenly a flurry of activity. Perhaps that was just about the policing.
Yes, indeed. We just switched our rooftop camera to see if we can see anything happening there. It looks as if nothing as yet. But of course we are now heading towards 2 o'clock. We were expecting perhaps this to end at 1 o'clock, and we may well get them coming out an hour later, who knows. But obviously the demonstrators with you have been in good voice this morning. Having talked to them, what is the overall impression? Are they angry? Are they actually quite ebullient now that they've actually achieved their aim of getting this issued onto the front pages of the world's press?
Yes, they do really feel like they've achieved something. Many of them came here today clutching national newspapers, looking at the photographs of the protests of the Kurds around the world, and feeling that really they've played their part in getting the names of the Kurdish people as part of history, really. That's the way they see it. A few of them told me this is part of history. History is being made here today, and we are part of that history. They feel they're part of something good for their people. They're doing something constructive for the cause of Kurdistan here today. And so really there's a mood of celebration almost.
Is it though perhaps a difficulty for the police in that if they take these 80 or 90 protesters away from inside the embassy, they still have a very large crowd there to disperse?
Absolutely, that's got to be a concern. The people here say that they will leave, and they'll leave peacefully after the protest is over. But clearly it depends on how those protesters are taken out of the embassy and the sort of scenes that we see at the embassy itself. The people here have always demanded that those people inside the embassy are allowed to leave without being taken into police custody, without facing any charges whatsoever. So once word filters through from the embassy of what's happening to those protesters, that will have an impact here. The police will be looking to contain the situation here and really just hope that these protesters leave very peacefully.
And presumably some of those people there behind you know or indeed perhaps are related to those inside the embassy.
Yes, I spoke to one man from Nottingham who said two of his friends, two women friends, are actually in there. And I asked him what sort of people they were, and he said they're passionate people, they're determined to do something. And really that is the impression we get of all the protesters here. They're very single-minded, they're very passionate about this cause. They're not just here to join in and sing and sit around and get their pictures taken and appear in the newspapers. They really, truly believe in what they're doing, and they want the world to believe in what they're doing too. They just say they've been ignored for so long that this is all they can do. These aren't extremists, these aren't renter protesters, there aren't a mob of people here. They're just generally a group of people who feel that they've been denied a voice in the world, and now they're trying to make their voices be heard.
I think they're going to love you for this. Thank you.
Yes, Emma, Hajir was just saying that in fact they will lobby for that. But Emma, for the moment, thanks very much indeed.
Our reporter Chris Roberts, he's on the rooftop from where you can see that camera position. Chris, we were hearing there from Emma and a very noisy, very lively bunch of protesters behind her, but still all looks fairly quiet outside the embassy direct.
Well, as you might be able to see, there has been some activity here. The police have formed a secure line either side of the entrance to the Greek embassy, which suggests that this hopefully is coming to a final solution. Obviously, the protesters will be herded down to the channel that exists between the two lines of police officers into coaches that are waiting to take them to a nearby police station. No sign, obviously, of any of them coming out yet, but clearly all the pieces are in place to take these people away.
And Chris, given that where they're standing is some distance away from where all the cameras are and all the journalists, and given the fact that the police are lined up and all those police buses, those police vehicles are there, one gets the impression that perhaps they're not going to be allowed to come out and make some sort of statement to journalists.
I can't imagine for a second they would allow all of the protesters inside. Obviously, we don't know how many there are, but we suspect there are at least 50. I can't imagine for a second they would allow them to arrive en masse at the checkpoint where Emma is based to make some kind of united, defiant statement to the world. That obviously could probably would inflame everybody who's on the other side of those barriers, who've been supporting those who've been holding the embassy to siege. So if anybody is going to make a statement, and I must stress we really don't know what's going to happen, it possibly might be one or two people, possibly a leader who's inside the embassy at the moment, but there really is no way they're going to allow them to go en masse to those barriers.
And indeed, Chris, we are just seeing some more pictures of mounted police who appear to have arrived. It seems that more and more police have been arriving as the hour progresses.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the place is completely swamped with police officers. I mean, I can count possibly 100 from the rooftop position where I am at the moment, and obviously there are many, many more hidden in the streets and the gardens behind where the embassy is to secure the entire area. The cost of this operation must be astronomical, but obviously that's not an issue to be taken into consideration at the moment. We just want this to end peacefully, and hopefully it will.
Yes, because we should say that this protest so far has been totally peaceful, that this huge police presence that we're seeing may not be necessary at all.
No, I can't imagine that we're going to see any kind of rioting behaviour either from the Kurdish supporters who are penned in behind the fences where Emma is, or obviously the people who've been holding the embassy. They very much want to make a dignified protest. So obviously, this dignified protest has taken the form of an illegal action, but we're not talking about hostages being held against their will. We're not talking about people being harmed. We're talking about grabbing the world's attention by occupying a building. And I think very much they want to come out in an orderly fashion. Some obviously make a statement, whether they can or cannot still is to be decided. But they want to come out in an orderly way and show the world that they're not the violent mob of terrorists that Turkey claims Kurds to be.
We perhaps should use this juncture whilst we're waiting for any movement outside the embassy to just bring our viewers up to date in case they have just joined us as to what's happening. These are pictures from West London, Holland Park, outside the Greek embassy, where Kurdish protesters, we think between 50 and 80 of them, have been occupying the embassy for 3 days. They have said that they will come out at lunchtime. We were expecting them to come out about an hour ago, but still there has been no signs. The protest, of course, at the arrest of one of their leaders, Abdullah Öcalan. Chris, perhaps we should take this moment whilst we are waiting for any activity just to recap on who we think is inside the embassy and how they got there.
Well, obviously the identity of those inside remains something of a mystery. We have in the past been able to contact one of the people who is inside, a gentleman by the name of Mehmet, but the identity of the others we don't actually know. Obviously there is a large Kurdish population in London, as there is in a number of other European cities, refugees who've been forced voluntarily or not from their homeland. But they've never staged, to my knowledge, any action as dramatic as the one we've seen here over the past 3 days. They're just people who believe fervently in their cause, fervently in the the idea of an independent homeland for Kurds, something they've been striving for generations, obviously to no avail so far. They're not sort of violent terrorists, as we've seen from other political causes in the past, here in London in particular. A lot of them possibly will be students. They're just people who want to make this statement to the world, want to draw the world's attention to the Kurdish plight, and have chosen this course of action.
Just watching more pictures of the mounted police in riot gear, still all standing and waiting.
Also with us here in the studio is Hajj Temurian, who himself is an Iranian Kurd and has been following Kurdish affairs for many, many years, and indeed was at the embassy this morning speaking to people. And
he's been making notes as you were speaking.
Copiously.
Two ironies come to my mind, Mark. I believe that if the Turks had not forced Abdullah Öcalan to leave Syria, his shelter in Syria last year, the damage to Turkey would have been less. All right, they would have had to go on to fight the PKK, and it does cost them $7,000 million dollars a year in military material and cost. But nevertheless, the damage to the name of Turkey has been enormous.
Turkey itself, though, perhaps would say that if he had been allowed to continue, then more people may have died in bombings and various attacks.
Well, not many people believe them, because the great majority of those people who died there have been, apparently, according to Amnesty International anyway, have been killed at the hands of the Turkish army. And also it's brought the Kurds together, all this publicity. It's been a great boost to their nationalism, is to strengthen their solidarity. Another thing that comes to my mind is that if the Turks were wise enough to preserve Abdullah Öcalan in good health, he could still be their Yasser Arafat and their Jerry Adams one day to talk to.
Well,
unfortunately,
indeed,
he could solve them, because if the Kurds of Turkey lose him, it will take many years for another leader to establish himself, and in the meantime the conflict will go on.
Let's just remind ourselves indeed of what the Turkish Prime Minister Ecevit has said today. We have taken great care that he, that is Abdullah Öcalan, would not be in any way badly treated during his arrest. It's been shown that he was in good health, that nobody was hurt, and the legal procedures will take place in a completely free way, because the Turkish judicial system is very independent.
Well, I'd be reassured by that if immediately Mr. Bülent Ecevit allowed, for example, members of British Parliament who are very keen to go there to visit Abdullah Öcalan in his prison cell, to visit him regularly, or at least reporters to see that he's not being treated badly. And on top of that, then there's a great deal more to say. The Turkish judiciary often reflects the will of the army when it comes to political matters. For example, I can tell you of one very brave Turkish sociologist by the name of Ismail Bishakci. He has spent 23 years in jail, according to my last calculation, merely because he's been saying to his fellow Turks, we have got Kurds in this country, they do not deserve this sort of treatment. What's wrong with their speaking the Kurdish language? So there's been no shortage of advice in the past to the Turkish judiciary, and they have not taken it.
Ecevit also made the point that he believed that Öcalan's detention will be a hammer blow, as he described it, to the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. He said, I'm sure it won't be as active and as coherent as before Öcalan's arrest. I'm sure now the PKK movement has reached a dead end. Do you believe that may be a forlorn hope, in that it has brought these Kurdish people together, as we can see from those pictures?
I'm certain the conflict will not go away. There's no military solution, and even the British government have been saying that to Turkey. But hammer blow is a very great exaggeration. I do believe that it's a major setback to the PKK, the loss of their leader around whom the PKK's organization has been built up. For example, for one thing, he has controlled their money supply. Who is going to pay the various branches of the PKK now? Possibly, if he's been wise enough, some members of his Central Committee in Europe will be having...
People are coming out now. They have their hands up. The protesters are now leaving the Greek embassy. We can see them there. They're walking down with their hands up.
In small groups, very small groups.
Well, let's speak to our reporter Chris Roberts on the roof. Chris, what's happening?
Yes, well, as you can see, they're emerging, hands in the air, obviously. They've been inside for more than 3 days now. They look reasonably calm. Nobody seems to be in any kind of a physically a bad way. They've obviously made their statement. They've made their protest. They're being guided by police officers down towards the coaches I can see waiting for me. Nobody obviously being manhandled. The police throughout this entire episode have played a very softly approach, and they want to continue in that vein. As you can possibly see, they're being led up now into a secure line of police officers in small groups. We don't know the exact numbers inside. We've guessed between 50 to 90 possibly, and they're going to be taken away in groups to a local police station.
But as you say, coming out with their hands up in small groups, all looking very calm and very peaceful and triumphant.
Well, exactly. Certainly the Kurdish protesters who've been here for the past 3 days have regarded this as a total victory. It's been a peaceful, dignified protest that obviously has involved the illegal occupation of a building, of course, but there's been no violence here, there's been no clashes with police officers, and they want to maintain a sort of dignified stand. They've made their points, they've got their pictures across world television screens, world front pages of newspapers. They've achieved what they set out to do. The world now knows better than it did before about the plight of Kurdistan, and they want to keep it that way.
We know that they had earlier demanded that they, as one of the conditions of them leaving the embassy, that they speak to journalists outside. They said they had an important message to tell them. It looks like that wish, though, has not been granted.
Well, we won't know, obviously, until all of the protesters are out of the building. It's possible, of course, that they'll take the large body, the majority of them, out of the building into the coaches that are waiting for them. And possibly, I can only say possibly, allow one or two to make a statement at the end. But given the large number of people who've been inside that building for the past 3 days, it's going to take some time to clear them. They don't want them all to come out en masse, so to speak. They'll be brought out, as you can see, in small groups. And possibly at the end, one or two of them will be allowed to say something. But as I say, we really don't know at the moment.
It doesn't seem, though, as if they're being bundled straight away into police vehicles.
No, possibly they're trying to identify who these people are. I mean, there was... The fact of the matter is that there was one Greek national inside the building who was being held, hadn't been threatened in any way. They're possibly trying to identify that person first. But obviously it seems fairly calm, it seems fairly organised. There's no question of anybody trying to run away, for instance. And the police, who are here in such enormous numbers, are just securing the situation.
Ajit Tamurian here in the studio. Some relief in that this obviously is ending in a very different way to the storming of the Israeli consulate in Berlin.
That's right. Even though I'm trying to be objective, there is something in me which is still Kurdish, and it's very happy that the placid image on the whole of the Kurds has not been shattered. I'm glad this came to a peaceful end without bloodshed. It occurs to me that these pictures are being watched in eastern Turkey, in all the Kurdish provinces of eastern Turkey, not because of Turkish television necessarily, but because in London there is a clandestine, almost, Kurdish television called Med TV, which broadcasts on a satellite hired from the Poles, I think. And despite all the activities of the Turkish army to destroy...
I think, in fact, we can just see that this person has been handcuffed. He's being led away there, the first protester from the building. I think we can see that he has actually been handcuffed. So it may well be that they have been arrested. We will obviously have to wait to see what is said by the police. How do you think the police ought to deal with this particular point?
Well, I think they are behaving very, very well. They are taking the names and identities of everyone, obviously. Crime has been committed. The seizure of an embassy which has diplomatic immunity and the apparent taking of one employee hostage is a serious crime. But I do believe that the British government will bring their influence to bear to make sure that the anger and the frustration of these people will be taken into account, and this will be reflected in any light punishment that will be meted out.
We can see the searches going on there and personal effects being bagged up. So obviously this is being done in a very methodical way there.
And very friendly.
Well, our reporter Emma Hurd is standing with the crowds a short distance away, just behind the barrier. Emma, what has the reaction been like to the release of them?
Well, there's a great deal of celebration down here, a great deal of chanting, as you can hear behind me. What we're not sure is whether these protesters actually know that the protesters inside the embassy have come out. They can't actually see the embassy from where they're standing at the moment, as I can't, but clearly they know that something has happened. They believe these people are heroes, and they want to give them a hero's welcome when they do come out of that embassy.
And Emma, as has happened throughout this three-day siege, the protesters have left very peacefully, showing no signs of protest at all.
They certainly appear to be fairly calm at the moment. There is no element of violence, there's no element of antagonism towards the police at all. They're enjoying themselves, they're celebrating. They feel that this has been a great success, this protest, and we understand that as soon as the siege at the embassy is fully over, as soon as they've seen those people leave, this protest will end, but we can expect the celebrations will perhaps continue for some time across London.
Well, let's bring in our reporter Chris Roberts, who has a slightly better vantage point on top of the roof overlooking the embassy. Chris, people still leaving the embassy. We've seen so far 2 people handcuffed. It looks like they're coming out, they're being questioned, they're being searched, then they're being handcuffed and led away.
Absolutely. It really is standard police procedure in a situation like this. You check people aren't armed in any way. They're questioned possibly for their identity. Any belongings taken away which possibly might pose some kind of a threat, for instance, taken. And they're being, I can just watch them now, being led one by one, flanked by a police officer down the road into a coach that's waiting at the end of a line.
But still coming out of the embassy, so obviously still some people inside.
Absolutely. I mean, we've known for a long time there's been a large number of protesters inside that building. This operation could take some time to end. Obviously, the police will want to go into the building once they believe they've got everyone out to check that everyone has come out and no one obviously is hiding inside the embassy. It could take some time that every person has to be searched, every person has to be checked, but I can just watch a line of them coming down the street as we speak, each person handcuffed by the looks of it with a police officer by their side, escorted quietly, peacefully, no sign of protest, no sign of anger, down the road here and into a coach that's waiting to take them to a police station.
And looking at the pictures, Chris, one gets the impression that it's a fairly mixed group of people. I saw one fairly elderly gentleman earlier and appeared to be some people who really are quite young.
I can just hear, by the way, I'm not sure if you can pick it up from the camera we've got on the roof here, one man who's being led now into a coach chanting defiantly Kurdish slogans by the sounds of it as he's being led away. Yes, as you say, I mean, the Kurdish issue, this isn't a new problem that's arisen. It's been going on for generations and has cross-age support. I mean, the demonstrators who you can hear behind Emma at the moment, for instance, there are children there are pensioners there are students, there are women. This is something that has united all Kurds. It's not a sort of radical sort of youth thing that started.
Indeed, Chris, we're just looking at pictures now of a gentleman in more advanced years, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, and clearly inside the embassy for the past few days have been a cross-section of ages, a cross-section of men and women. As I'm just watching more of them being led out now, we'll get a better idea as to their identities once obviously they've been taken into custody and start being questioned.
And Hajir Timurian here in the studio, in fact you recognise some of those people as they come out. Obviously we won't reveal names because they believe have been arrested, but some familiar faces to you.
Only in outline. I cannot be sure. They are small, and nor have I been close to these people. Thank heavens, in any case, it's ending in a very friendly manner. All that the Greeks need to do is now to air all the rooms. They'll be very smelly after 3 days of sloganizing Kurds. I hope the showers worked.
That's a point we hadn't thought about actually, but they all look to be in fairly good health, and obviously one of the concerns had been that they were going to start this hunger strike, but it seems that everyone's able to walk under their own steam to these coaches.
Yes, obviously there will be medical detachments there as well, just in case any of them will be weakly or ill. But it doesn't seem that they've had a bad time actually. They seem to be all smiling and walking strongly, arm in arm with the police.
Do you believe these people will be members of the PKK, the organisation set up by Öcalan?
Not necessarily. I think probably they'll be just members of cultural associations in Manchester, in Hackney, etc., reflecting the whole breadth of the community, and many of them will be just simple patriots of Kurdistan.
But of course we have seen a tremendous amount of international organisation with these various consulates and embassies being taken over across Europe. There was obviously some kind of international organisation before this took place.
This is the problem with the new Europe, with massive immigration from outside Europe. The police forces find it extremely difficult to penetrate the ranks of ethnic organizations. So, for example, even though obviously these sieges were organized and coordinated, suddenly sprung upon us overnight, the police everywhere were taken by surprise.
Well, looking at the pictures, as you can see, a very orderly line of protesters coming out of the Greek embassy. Police standing around very peacefully, very quietly. The police obviously are taking down details as to who was inside the embassy. Those details are being given peacefully. More people still coming out. They're being searched and belongings are being bagged, and then it looks like they're being handcuffed and led away. We can see the other pictures of the crowds as well, chanting. Word now must have got round that these men have left the embassy, because in fact our reporter was saying that they can't actually see from where they are. And our reporter on top of the roof, Chris Roberts, is there. Chris, one is impressed by how orderly and how organised and how quiet this coming out of the embassy is.
Absolutely, and I think that's what those who've been holding the embassy siege for the past 3 days wanted to prove. They're coming out as an organised group. They're not fighting with police officers, for instance. There's no question of any violence. They've made their statement, they've made their protest, they've attracted the world's attention, and they want to keep up a very dignified stance as they're being led away. I think we should also at this point really give credit to the police force, who will obviously be delighted about the way this operation has ended. From the moment it started, they played a very, very softly approach. They at no point felt that anybody inside the embassy was in danger. There was no question, for instance, of large numbers of people being hostage and ill-treated. And they're obviously delighted that it's ended in such a peaceful way, despite the fact that obviously the cost will be extremely high.
Well, also joining us on the ground with those demonstrators is our reporter Emma Hurd. And Emma, the reaction already starting?
Jubilation really here on the ground. They feel that they've achieved what they set out to achieve. They feel they've focused the world's attention on the plight of the Kurdish people. With me is one of the people who've organised this protest, Zinar Hogir. If I can ask you, what's your reaction to the way these people are coming out of the embassy? It appears to be very calm. Some are handcuffed, though.
Well, I mean, there are no needs to be violence. They were there for a purpose, and there has been a lot of response to the demands which they have made. But they are now on their ways, and I believe they will be taken to the Charing Cross police stations. The lawyers are with them, and there are the lawyers who are waiting there to represent if there are going to be any charges. We hope that there are not going to be charges made. People are just simply will be cautioned. The people here will stay here and to sort of until to reevaluate to see what developments are going to be. Certainly the people here are very determined that they don't want any of the protesters to be charged, and in fact the feelings was, I think, that it was not even necessary to handcuff the people because they have decided to come out voluntarily. So I think that is not a very good sign to actually handcuff some of the protesters.
So you feel that the people here will stay until they know that these people aren't going to face any charges?
The people are here to stay, and they will reevaluate the situation to see how the situation is going to develop inside the Charing Cross police stations, how many people are going to be charged and what they're going to be charged with. It's really important and crucial that we know these ones. These people, I mean, we're all here, and we're not intending to cause any criminal damage or whatsoever, and it's in response to the kidnapping of Chairman Öcalan's, and I think it proves that if we hadn't have been here worldwide, then the situation would have been rather different.
Do you feel you've set out what you wanted to achieve? You've achieved your aims?
Not just the protest here, the worldwide protest, the protests which have been continuing in Kurdistan. The Turkish states have already fired up on the uprising in Batman. Up to 5 people have been killed, 2 dozens or more people have been injured. So it shows that we don't want the same treatments by the European states to the Kurds. I'm sure if this is going to be the case, then as it has been up to now, the demonstrations of any kind will be maintained as peaceful as possible.
So that's the organiser of the protesters here. Clearly they plan to stay here as long as they can to make sure that those protesters inside don't face charges when they come out. Clearly we're not very sure at the moment whether they will be detained for any amount of time or what will happen to them. The police are refusing to give any statement about that at this stage.
And Emma, certainly no indication yet what the police will do about that very large group of demonstrators outside the embassy.
That's right. I think there's little that they can do. I don't think they will make any move to try and move them on by force. I think they will say that really they're out of the main road, they're away from the traffic there. They will try to keep them as calm as possible and hope that public order is maintained. But I think really once again they will be trying to keep a low profile, a softly approach if you like to policing, and wait for them to drift away of their own accord.
Emma, for the moment, thanks very much.
Our other reporter on the roof from where that camera is picking up the line of protesters talking to police is our reporter Chris Roberts. Chris, the line appears to be lengthening.
Certainly, one by one they're still being brought down and put into coaches. I've counted possibly a dozen or so went into the first coach. They seem to be starting to put people into a second coach now. This is still going to take some time. As I said before, people have to be secure, their belongings, if they pose any kind of threat, taken away, checked for weapons and so on. I think we can possibly, well, obviously this situation has come to a peaceful end, but I think a few people are worried about what's going to happen next. As long as Mr. Öcalan is held by the Turkish authorities, and there's certainly no question of him being freed, the situation is going to remain very tense. What happens next, for instance, when Mr. Öcalan is put on trial? Will those Kurdish demonstrators we've seen on the streets, not only here in London but around Europe, will they be back on the streets again protesting in the belief that he's not getting a fair trial? And if he is found guilty, and obviously the Turks have branded this gentleman #1 terrorist for some years now, and he faces the death penalty, what happens then? I'm speculating, obviously. It's a hypothetical discussion, but certainly this whole debate, this whole situation isn't going away just because we've resolved this siege.
Indeed, and we have in fact had an interview which we have quotes from the Turkish Prime Minister, who said that the questioning of Öcalan is starting today. It may take less than a week to continue that questioning, and therefore a trial may start fairly soon after. But also given a veiled warning to Western governments not to interfere. So I suppose the concern is the Kurdish protesters may get very frustrated.
Absolutely. There hasn't been any, I mean, obviously the Foreign Office here in Britain has made a public statement that it hopes Mr. Öcalan's trial will be free and fair, and he will receive the justice that other countries would expect. But as you say, the Turks have insisted that there should be no kind of outside interference in his trial. The protesters we've seen here for the past 3 days will be watching extremely closely as to what happens. Obviously, the Turks believe they've amassed vast amounts of evidence against Mr. Öcalan over recent months and years. And so they're very worried that his trial, the protesters are very worried that his trial will be something of an open and shut showcase, a show trial, and he won't face any kind of fair justice.
You talk, though, about concerns that we in the West may have about any other protests. Looking at this very peaceful, very orderly line of protesters speaking with police, one thinks that perhaps, though, they're mindful of the fact that they do need to keep the public on their side in some way, if they can at all.
Absolutely, they want to win world support, and I'm sure there's a certain amount of sympathy for their cause, in particular the way they've behaved themselves over this issue, the fact that they've come out, the fact that there's been no violence, the fact that there weren't sort of large numbers of hostages inside the Greek embassy. I mean, of course, they could have taken the Greek embassy in the middle of the day, or they could have tried to at least, and the situation could have been a lot worse. They want to retain world support. They want the world to believe that the Kurdish cause is a just cause, and the bad guys in this are the Turks. The Turks, of course, on the other hand, point to the fact that Mr. Öcalan is alleged to have orchestrated and conducted activities they regard as purely terrorist. He's not a freedom fighter as far as they're concerned. He's a terrorist and will be punished as one.
Just back to the pictures that we're looking at, Chris, do you get the impression that all the protesters have now left the embassy?
I really don't know. I wouldn't like to say. We, of course, didn't know the exact numbers who were inside in the first place. Certainly there's no question of the police beginning to withdraw from this area at the moment. There are scores of police vehicles sealing off every street around here, and they're going to remain here until the Greek embassy is definitely secured, and they've thoroughly searched the building to ensure that nobody's hiding there hoping to escape later.
Any news, Chris? I suppose we can't really tell who he is or where he might be, of this hostage that was being held, the clerk.
No, obviously each person will be asked to identify themselves when they come out of the building. They'll know the name of the person, the police will, who has been held there. He possibly, of course, will be taken to the police station as well, very likely to be taken to the police station as well, to be questioned as to what happened inside the building over the past 3 days. But there's never been any suggestion that he's been harmed while being held hostage.
Chris, sorry, I'll have to butt in here now.
Yes, because the Labour MP Anne Clwyd is joining us on her mobile phone. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We understand, Anne Clwyd, that you were in fact instrumental in the final negotiations. Is that right?
Well, I was part of a group of 4 of us. I'm standing outside the embassy now. We've just seen an end to the siege. All the demonstrators have come out. It's been a very impressive operation altogether, and they're all ready to get on buses now with their escorts. They're going to a police station where they will be interviewed. But I must say it's been a very impressive operation on the part of the police and all the people involved in the negotiations.
And indeed, obviously, a very different outcome to those dreadful scenes at Berlin that we saw yesterday.
Well, indeed, yes. We're very pleased about that, and it's been a very good British operation, I have to say. And, I mean, all the demonstrators came out, obviously, shouting support for their leader, Mr. Öcalan, but nobody struggled. It was a very peaceful end to the whole thing. So I think everybody who's taken part in bringing about this should be congratulated.
Indeed. Can you give an indication, though, what kind of negotiations actually brought about the end of the siege?
Well, it's been going on for most of the morning, and I understand, originally people thought they weren't going to be charged, but when they were told that, they have to, under British law, be taken and interviewed at a police station, then they were quite happy with that arrangement.
So are they actually technically being arrested, do you know?
Well, technically, yes, certainly.
But that was part of the negotiation.
I'm now walking with a group of people who were involved in this negotiation towards the demonstrators, because we're going to tell them what's happened. So we're walking towards the main road.
But obviously they all believe that they've achieved their aim, in that the world's cameras and the world's press have been showing these pictures and indeed listening to their points.
Yes, I'm sure that is the case. But clearly they would like some assurances that their leader will be allowed, that there will be access for his lawyers and also for a medical team, so that they can make sure that he's being treated properly in custody.
Do you know, Anne Clwyd, if they've managed to hear what Prime Minister Ecevit has actually said today? He did reiterate that Abdullah Öcalan has not been in any way badly treated during his arrest. He's being well treated in custody, and that the legal procedures, as he said, will take place in a completely free way.
I think people still would like independent observers to emphasise that. As yet, I understand his lawyers have been denied access, and I think it's essential that for somebody charged of serious offences as he is, but his lawyers are allowed access immediately.
I understand that you may well have already made some representations to Robin Cook to try to press the Turkish authorities to actually allow international observers into the trial.
I have indeed, yes.
What was his response to that?
I haven't had any response yet, but I am in touch with the Foreign Office, and I expect to hear from them shortly.
But do you believe, knowing the history of the PKK and Turkey, that in fact the Turkish authorities will allow such a thing to take place?
I very much hope so, because the rest of the world is looking at them very closely.
And obviously one of the dangers for them, as some of our commentators have said today, is that they could create a martyr in terms of Abdullah Öcalan.
Sorry, I'm getting near the crowd of demonstrators now. It's getting very difficult to hear.
Right, well, we'll try one more time. I hope you can hear us. I was saying that one of the difficulties, obviously, for the Turkish authorities is that they could create a martyr out of Abdullah Öcalan.
Well, indeed, yes. That's why it's essential that his lawyers see him as soon as possible.
In fact, we're just seeing you, Anne Cleward, on our television screens now as we speak by the wonders of modern technology. We can see you walking down the street.
Okay, well, I'll leave you right now then.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. We can see you've just reached the police cordon there. Thanks very much indeed for your help.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's just speak now to our reporter Chris Roberts, who is on the roof with our rooftop camera. We've got a number of cameras down there bringing you pictures from various vantage points. Chris, again, the line seems to be moving extremely slowly.
Well, certainly, I don't think that's a huge surprise. The police are happy, obviously, that this has ended peacefully, want to make sure that the operation itself is completed in a very orderly fashion. I can still see people being led one by one down towards a line of, let me see, 4 or 5 coaches I can see in front of me. They seem to be being put into the coaches in groups of a dozen or so, handcuffed, and obviously with a police escort one by one. It could take possibly another hour or so before these coaches move, although possibly they might decide to take them in groups. But given the large police presence that exists down here, they probably want to take them all in one group, secured with the dozens of police vehicles I can see around here, and off to a police station for questioning and possible charges.
What's your best estimate, Chris, as to how many protesters were inside the embassy, if we assume that they've all now come out?
I must admit, it's very difficult to gauge, because all I'm seeing is them coming down in groups of 1 or 2 with a police escort. Here comes another here comes another pair down the street at the moment. And obviously there is such a large police presence surrounding that entire area, it's very difficult to gauge. Certainly at least 50, I would have thought, but I wouldn't like to make any more accurate a guess.
We're just seeing pictures of 2 more protesters, both handcuffed. So obviously three in fact. Obviously all the protesters, after they've been questioned and searched, are in fact being arrested.
Yes, I think there's no debate about that. They've all been involved in an illegal activity, and therefore under British jurisdiction have to be technically arrested and taken for questioning. Whether charges are pressed, obviously nobody knows at the moment, but I can't imagine them going down for a quiet cup of tea at the local police station and then being released immediately. Obviously there'll be some kind of debate as to what happens next.
Well, indeed, Chris, let's just update ourselves on the international situation, which has some bearing on this, because the Greek government has just issued some details about the affair from their point of view, and the 3 ministers who were forced to resign have actually said that the Greek government was actually saddled, as they put it, with Öcalan by Greek sympathisers who sneaked him into the country. The foreign minister, Theodoros Pangalos, said that the first time he entered Greece without anyone knowing, I will tell you frankly, he said, as the Prime Minister, Kostas Simitis, has said, we did not want Öcalan in Greece. So obviously that puts something of a new spin on Greece's involvement in this. There was some confusion as to Greek involvement in this, and that obviously brought about the protesters actually entering the Greek embassy there in Holland Park.
Sorry?
Chris, can you hear us?
Sorry, I can just. It's very windy up here.
Yes, I know, because you're way up in the treetops there. We were just saying that some new information coming through there from the Greek government indicating that perhaps the Greek government was not directly involved and that Greek sympathisers have saddled the Greek government with this particular problem.
Well, absolutely. It's an incredibly complex international issue. Obviously, there's very little love lost between Greece and Turkey, and hasn't been for some considerable time. But the Kurds are obviously displaced as they are throughout those southern parts of Turkey and the northern parts of Iraq, have sought refuge and support where...
You know, those white kids.
I think we'll obviously have to wait to see what the total official line is as to who's been supporting who and who the Kurds blame for the capture of their leader.
Just one thought, Chris. There obviously was a hostage effectively taken in the embassy, although the protesters named him as a guest, and that was Babis Patsouris, who is a clerk there. Do we know what's happened to him?
No idea at the moment. I'm obviously sort of 10 stories up looking down on events. I suspect he will be identified as quickly as possible by the police, but I doubt very much whether he'll be released straight away. He'll probably be taken for questioning at a local police station as well. And, unless it's proved that he took some active part in this, will be released.
And indeed perhaps may have to stay on in the embassy because, as we mentioned, it is still sovereign territory, Greek sovereign territory.
Absolutely. All embassies across London, across all parts of the world, have that international status. I'm sure the staff who are normally resident in the Greek embassy have been watching events very closely and will be making their way here very soon, if they're not here already, to reoccupy their piece of sovereign territory, so to speak. And the future of the staff member who's been held will still be decided once he's gone through some kind of questioning.
But obviously, just from seeing the way that this operation is being handled, this has been in preparation for some days since the beginning of the siege, perhaps. It's all very carefully orchestrated.
By the police authorities, you mean?
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely. I mean, they've had hostage negotiators here and siege negotiators here from the moment the entire crisis began, and they're clearly delighted about the fact that it's ended in such a peaceful and organised manner. I'm sure lessons can be learned of some kind out of this, but it's very difficult to make any plans for the kind of action we've seen here unless you have some kind of large police presence surrounding an embassy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These things can happen.
Indeed. Chris, for the moment, thanks very much.
Okay.
Well, our other reporter, Emma Hurd, is to the bottom of your picture as you're looking behind barriers with the crowd of protesters, 500 to 600 people, perhaps possibly more. Emma, any signs at all of that crowd dispersing?
No, certainly not. I think they're going to stay here for a good few hours longer to celebrate, if nothing else. What the leader of this group was telling us is that they're not prepared to leave until they know that these people who were inside the embassy aren't going to face charges. They're very concerned that they're going to be punished for what they say was just a peaceful protest. And so there's every sign that at least a group of them will remain here for some time yet.
And one wonders whether perhaps, Emma, as those people are taken off to a police station, whichever one that they're taken to, the protesters may move on to that location.
That's right. If I can just give you a view, maybe pan the camera around and have a look. The road you can see there moving in the background behind these protesters. There's every chance that the protesters may have to be bussed along that road behind these protesters beyond those police vans yet. So they could actually have to be brought past the protesters. Clearly that could cause a great deal of movement. I would have thought the police will try and take them round the back if they can, but the protesters here are waiting for a glimpse of them. So it may actually benefit the police to show them that these people are out, they've gone, there's nothing else to see here.
Well, Emma, we just have some more news that a statement from Scotland Yard has said that the protesters have been arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Charing Cross and Paddington Green police stations have been put on standby in the event of those arrests, and it's thought the protesters are going to be taken there. So we were looking at those pictures, they were seeing them handcuffed, so it was clear that they had indeed been arrested. I suppose the question is now whether or not they'll be charged or whether they'll just be cautioned. You were saying that the protesters behind you want to make sure that these people are released. Do you get any sort of indication from them what their next stage plan is for any protest?
No, I think clearly they're not going to give up here. We've had several of them saying that they plan to target the Turkish tourist industry. They want to try to stop British people going to Turkey, for instance, and spending their money there, which these people claim is actually funding what they say is a dirty war against the Kurdish people who are living in Turkey. So clearly they're not going to stop here. It's not clear what sort of form their protest is going to take next, whether they're going to carry on having protests like this, or whether they're going to take rather more direct action, perhaps against some travel agents, protesting at the travel agents, or really just doing what they can to keep their cause in the media.
Indeed, because as we all know, Turkey is quite a popular destination for Western Europeans, and indeed many people now may well be put off going to that destination, not necessarily because they think they are directly going to be attacked, but it just is deemed as not safe anymore.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we have to remember that the area of Turkey where the disputed area that the Kurds are fighting over is very far from the holiday destinations that we see in our brochures in the travel agents. But clearly this has placed a link in people's minds between Turkey and what these people say is a vicious cause, a vicious fight against them. They say many people have died at the hands of the Turkish authorities. The Turkish authorities would say that many of their people have died at the hands of the PKK. So clearly it has put it in people's minds that Turkey is involved in this issue. It may well highlight the fact that the country could be viewed as unsafe, but I think if you can remember that Turkey recently has been so popular because it is so cheap. The currency there has been performing fairly badly against the pound, so it's become the cheapest destination for people from Britain. So whether they will consider political philosophy over the demands of their pocket, we don't know.
But indeed, Emma, thinking of it from the Turkish authorities' point of view, they will want to ensure that Westerners do still keep coming to their country, so one would think that they would want to try and dampen down any uprising.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Turkish authorities have always claimed that the PKK are a terrorist group. They say they have no right to demand this section of southeast Turkey, which they are demanding. They would argue that what we are seeing now is more representatives of terrorism demonstrating around the world. The people here, of course, would say that the situation is very different. They would argue that they have right on their side. It's Turkey, in fact, who is oppressing them. Clearly there is a dispute, but Turkey will be wanting to show tourists that the place is safe to go to and they can still enjoy a holiday there. Whether that message gets through, we'll have to see.
Okay, Emma, we'll leave you for a moment.
Well, for those of you just joining us, let's just update you on what's happened. The embassy at the Greek siege, the siege at the Greek embassy, which has been on for 3 days, has ended. It ended about 45 to 50 minutes ago, peacefully. And indeed, those inside the embassy, estimates of up to 90 people, are being led out and then arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and they are now being taken to Charing Cross or Paddington Green police stations. We heard from the Labour MP Anne Clwyd that negotiations had been going on as to their exact treatment once they left the embassy, but it's all being carried out orderly and peacefully. Our reporter David Bowden now looks back at the end of the Greek embassy siege.
After 3 days and worldwide publicity, the Kurdish protesters relinquished their hold on the Greek embassy in London and peacefully yet defiantly filed out of the building to be arrested by waiting police officers. The protesters had occupied the embassy on Tuesday after the capture of the Kurdish guerrilla leader Abdullah Öcalan. He was snatched by Turkish special forces from the Greek ambassador's home in Kenya. As the 50 or so Kurds who'd occupied the embassy in Holland Park left the building, hundreds of other protesters held at the end of the road turned towards the embassy and shouted freedom. Protesters were lined up by police in the street and searched. Riot police had been standing by throughout the siege, but in the end they were only needed as escorts. There was no violence. Throughout, the protesters said they wanted the world to focus on the plight of the Kurds in Turkey and elsewhere in the Middle East, and for Western governments to put pressure on the Turkish authorities to ensure fair treatment for their leader, Abdullah Öcalan. The protesters were eventually loaded onto buses to be taken away for questioning. A Greek embassy clerk held by the protesters throughout the siege was released unharmed. David Bowden, Sky News.
Well, that report just compiled by David Bowden. These are live pictures outside the Greek embassy in West London, Holland Park. As you can see, protesters still being questioned by police. They're all lined up in a fairly orderly fashion, being questioned and handcuffed and led away. We know that they have all been arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act and are going to be taken to Charing Cross and Paddington Green police stations. But it has been a very peaceful demonstration, or as the demonstrators left the embassy. A spokesman for the Kurdish Information Centre has expressed anger at the fact that these people have been handcuffed after they've given themselves up. He said that there was never any intention to be violent or to cause any damage, and that to bring them out in handcuffs is wrong and simply an overreaction. Well, Emma Heard is with the crowd of protesters, 600 or 700 strong, behind the barrier near the embassy. Emma, as I was saying there, some anger being expressed at the fact that these protesters are being handcuffed.
That's right. It was a spokesman for the protesters here who said that really this was no way to treat these protesters who'd behaved so calmly, who'd cooperated with the police and spoken to them and negotiated the outcome to this siege with them. There was no way to treat them, to handcuff them and lead them away in such a way. And he was pretty angry about that situation. What he's waiting to see is whether these people will face any charges. Clearly it's difficult. The police have a certain procedure they have to follow. They were obviously following that procedure. They clearly have to question them about the incident which took place at the embassy itself, and they want to make sure that they know exactly what happened there, what crime has been committed, if any, before any charges will follow. But it is a move which has upset the Kurdish people here.
But I suppose from the point of view of the police, as we saw a very heavy police presence, which in fact so far has not proved to be necessary. Mounted police, some in riot gear. I suppose they didn't think that they could take too many precautions.
That's right. I mean, the number of people here behind me, some 600-700, the number of people in the embassy itself, they have to take these precautions. Clearly, it was a volatile crowd at many points over this three-day period. They had to be careful. In the end, it seems those forces weren't needed. And the people here seem to be extremely happy with the way the police have handled it so far, apart from that image of some of those protesters leaving the embassy with the handcuffs on. We have to remind you, though, that the protesters here can't actually see the embassy. They won't have seen those people coming out. They are aware of that they are out, but they won't have seen the manner in which they were withdrawn from that embassy.
Emma, for the moment, thank you. We can just update you with news of a sit-in at the UN headquarters in the Austrian capital Vienna also ending. 90 activists left shortly after 2 o'clock, about the same time, in fact, as they left the embassy here, embassy here in London. They'd been in there some 4 hours after forcing their way into the UN building. Chris Roberts, our reporter, is on the rooftop seeing these scenes in Holland Park in London. And as we mentioned there with Vienna, Chris, yet more evidence about how carefully coordinated and organised these protests have been.
Yes, it has been quite extraordinary, hasn't it? It wasn't some kind of spontaneous act. This was clearly carefully planned after the arrest of Mr. Öcalan. And obviously the way it's ended has been carefully orchestrated as well. I'm still watching people being brought down individually and put inside a line of coaches that's waiting to take them to at least one, possibly two local police stations, but generally things are calming down here significantly. There's a line of possibly 20 police vehicles ready to escort the coaches to a police station once they've got everybody out. But that, of course, still could be some time because they'll want to go through the building from top to bottom to ensure nobody's left inside. But I suspect not. I suspect those who have been holding the embassy obviously want to come out en masse, and they have done. There's no kind of duplicity about this. It's been an organised, calculated demonstration, and it's ending in exactly the same way as it began.
don't know if you managed to do your mental arithmetic yet, but I think we were talking about the possibility of some 83 people being inside the embassy, certainly between 80 and 90. It looks as if the majority of those people have come out, as you were saying.
Absolutely. They're still being led through the secure police line that's positioned either side of the embassy entrance. They're being escorted one by one through that and into coaches, but I think they're on to about coach number 4. Obviously, the coaches can hold possibly 40 or 50 people each, but they're not filling them. They're possibly putting a dozen or so in each one. But it's very organised, it's very calm. We've had 1 or 2 protesters look up to us on the roof. They can obviously see us with our cameras from down on the road and shout a couple of slogans, a couple of, obviously in Kurdish, a couple of freedom statements. But it's been a very organised, a very dignified, if you can call it that, given the fact that a criminal act has been committed here, dignified end to this protest. I was listening to one of the Kurdish protesters who was with Emma earlier, talking obviously very angrily about the fact that these people are being led out handcuffed. Well, I'm sorry, but there's simply no alternative to that. These people, whatever their political cause and however just or unjust it may be, have committed a criminal act, and the police are placing them under arrest, and that's standard arrest procedure. Nobody's being ill-treated. Nobody is. There's no suggestion of that whatsoever. They're being quietly and calmly handcuffed and led into these waiting coaches.
And obviously some concerns, Chris, in that we know they had been watching Sky News pictures inside the embassy, that we were seeing the police build up with police dressed in protective gear, riot shields. In fact, Chris, let me just interrupt you because I know that Emma has just managed to reach Chief Superintendent Anthony Wills from Metropolitan Police.
Yes, we have the Chief Superintendent with me as I speak to you. Chief Superintendent, if I can just ask you the manner in which this siege ended. Can you give us some information about how those protesters came out and what has happened to them now?
I can. I'm pleased to be able to say that after 60 hours, the protesters finally came out from the embassy very calmly, in a very controlled way. We'd negotiated the manner in which they would come out of the embassy, and they followed those instructions absolutely. They were very calm. What I'd just like to say is that our strategy of playing it long has worked. It was always been our intention to get the demonstrators to come out so that no one suffered any harm or injury. I've now witnessed that, and they are out and on their way.
We know that some of them have been handcuffed. Can you tell us why?
Yes, there is actually over 70 of them, contrary to our earlier estimates. And with that number of people, it was just a precautionary measure. But I can assure you that there's been absolutely no violence at all. They've been very calm, quite subdued, but they came out of the embassy chanting and their normal supportive comments, and they left without any difficulty at all.
As to the man who was being held hostage, what can you tell us about him now?
He came out first. I can just say that he shook hands with one of the people from the embassy as he left, and then was taken away. He's fine.
He's very well, is he?
All the people from inside the embassy have been arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and they're going to be taken to a London police station where the investigation will now commence.
Sky News has actually spoken to one of the leaders of the protesters who says he's extremely concerned about these people being handcuffed and taken off to be questioned. Can you tell him or reassure him that these people won't face charges?
Well, I can state to you that they knew what would happen to them when they came out. They knew they were going to be detained. There was never any question of anything else happening. So I'd be surprised if they weren't aware of that.
And what happens now with the protesters we can hear behind us? What do we do? What sort of policing presence will you be having here?
Well, this will just police this demonstration as we police any other. Thankfully now we don't have the problems of an embassy situation, which we've had up until just recently. And if these people wish to stay here and make their point, we'll police them as we would any demonstration in London.
Clearly officers have been inside the embassy now. Has there been any damage inside there?
I'm not going to discuss any further issues about the embassy.
The Greek authorities must have been in touch, though. Have you had any communications from them?
Well, we've constantly been talking to the Greek authorities as they are the owners of the embassy. Okay, thank you.
The people who've been arrested, who've been in charge of much of the policing at this end of the Greek embassy and indeed controlling many of the protesters here.
Emma, it's Kate Garraway joining you now. We're seeing live pictures, as you say. Is there any sign that the people are moving away now?
There isn't any sign that they're moving. In fact, more seem to be coming as I'm speaking to you. Clearly the crowd, the noise is attracting many, but I think many of them have come in from all over London, from all over the country, to witness this event, to witness these people who they believe are their heroes coming out of the embassy having made their point.
And indeed her point has been well made. Of course, I would imagine they'll all be watching very closely to see if some of the promises that to press for a fair trial for Öcalan will be made.
Yes, I think they'll be keeping a very close eye. Clearly this is an issue they're going to let drop now. They finally got it in the public eye. They finally got the public's attention. What they're hoping is that a series of demonstrations perhaps over the next few weeks will help draw even more attention to this cause. It's always been their main concern that the trial of Öcalan will go ahead, and after that trial the plight of the Kurds will be forgotten. What they want to make sure is that that doesn't happen. We won't forget them, and clearly that's what they're trying to achieve now, but at the moment they're just celebrating here. They're delighted with what they've achieved.
And we can see one by one, very carefully, each protester being led away, handcuffed. There has been some concern that that's happened, but it is perhaps understandable just to keep things as simply as possible.
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's what the police spokesman was saying. They've clearly always been keen to handle this issue extremely sensitively. That's what they've always wanted to do. And I think they said that because of the sheer number of them, it was procedure to make sure that they were handcuffed, to make sure that their departure from the embassy was an orderly one. That's why they say the handcuffs were in place. They didn't want to send out any wrong messages with those handcuffs. And indeed, the police spokesman we spoke to seemed to be suggesting that their behaviour was extremely good, extremely calm, and no cause for concern whatsoever.
And Chris Roberts is watching from the viewpoint as we continue with these live pictures. It's still, even after the siege is officially ended or ending, no sign of the cheers abating or the people clearing.
I'm sorry, Kate, could you just say the last bit again? I lost you for a second.
Still some victory celebration, raised arms as we see that protest being carried out. No sign of the crowds disappearing or indeed the cheers of what they see as a victory abating.
No, but I think this really is entering its final stages now. We can see the preparations on the streets below me of the vehicles, the police vehicles that will escort the coaches containing the protesters. They're prepared. They're lined up either side of the end of the road where the coaches will come out. And so I can't really see this going on that much longer. There are still people coming out, ones and twos that are being led into the last of the line of coaches that is down on the road below me. But I think once those people have actually left and been taken for questioning at a local police station, the protesters who've been camped here for the past 3 days will disperse themselves. That's certainly the indication that we got earlier when it became clear this was approaching an end.
Chris, for the moment, thank you. Just to reiterate, if you've just joined us, you're watching Sky News. It's just after 3 o'clock with the important news that the siege at the Greek embassy in London is over. Protesters began emerging from the building about 45 minutes ago. They were met by police, searched and taken away in small groups. Some have been arrested under terrorism prevention laws. The atmosphere had been tense most of this morning, but there was no violence. The first hints of a surrender came with a phone call when the protesters said they'd come out at 1 o'clock.
After 3 days and worldwide publicity, the Kurdish protesters relinquished their hold on the Greek embassy in London and peacefully yet defiantly filed out of the building to be arrested by waiting police officers. The protesters had occupied the embassy on Tuesday after the capture of the Kurdish guerrilla leader Abdullah Öcalan. He was snatched by Turkish special forces from the Greek ambassador's home in Kenya. As the 50 or so Kurds who'd occupied the embassy in Holland Park left the building, hundreds of other protesters held at the end of the road turned towards the embassy and shouted freedom. Protesters were lined up by police in the street and searched. Riot police had been standing by throughout the siege, but in the end they were only needed as escorts. There was no violence. Throughout, the protesters said they wanted the world to focus on the plight of the Kurds in Turkey and elsewhere in the Middle East, and for Western governments to put pressure on the Turkish authorities to ensure fair treatment for their leader, Abdullah Öcalan. The protesters were eventually loaded onto buses to be taken away for questioning. A Greek embassy clerk held by the protesters throughout the siege was released unharmed. David Bowden, Sky News.
Well, let's return live now to our reporter Emma Hurd, who is still outside the Greek embassy in London, as we can see more and more protesters being taken away. Are we any clearer as to what will happen to them now, the protesters?
We understand that they'll be taken to Charing Cross police station, where they'll be questioned. They've actually been arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and we're not sure at this stage whether they will face any charges. Clearly that's what's concerning some of the protesters here. They want to make sure that these people are released without charge. They want to make sure that they're not punished over this occupation of the embassy. They say it was a political protest, it wasn't a violent protest, and they say they shouldn't be punished as criminals.
And as we saw in David Bowden's report there, long, detailed negotiations to arrive at this peaceful, non-violent end to the siege. It must be a very successful operation from the police's point of view.
I think the police must be delighted by this outcome. Clearly we haven't seen such good outcomes at other embassies that were occupied around Europe and indeed around the world. They always said they were going to play the long game on this one. They didn't want to rush in. They didn't feel that anyone's life was in danger inside the embassy. So they said they were willing to wait. They were willing to negotiate. They understood it was a sensitive political issue, and they wanted to be there for the protesters, to negotiate with them and really understand their demands, talk to them, try to reach some sort of accommodation. And I think that's what they've achieved today.
Indeed, Emma, and for those that have been involved in this protest, the questions are going to go on. This doesn't end here, does it? This for them was the big statement, the bold statement. Now they want to see that it's followed through.
That's right. They'll certainly be watching very closely that the people who've made promises to achieve this end to this siege will be keeping those promises. Clearly they've achieved something. They've got the international community to take notice. They've got the international community to focus attention on the trial of Abdullah Öcalan. It may be very difficult for Turkey to conduct an unfair trial after this. Certainly the world's attention will be on them. So from that point of view, they have achieved something. But very quickly, issues like this slip out of the public's view, slip away from the television screens and from our newspapers. The people here want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and they're willing to carry on protesting to make sure.
And for those of us who joined us at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock and are learning this news for the first time, we should say that the clerk, the embassy clerk who was being held as a hostage or as a guest, as they put it, appears to be safe and well.
Yes, we understand that he came out of the embassy and ahead of the protesters, and he actually shook hands with one of the embassy officials. He appears to have been unharmed throughout this 3-day siege. The protesters inside always said that he was their guest. They weren't holding him against his will. But clearly it can't have been an easy situation from him, but he appears to be safe and well, and he doesn't appear to have suffered any ill effects from it at all.
Well, as the siege winds down, the protesters continue to be let out. We'll leave Emma for a moment to hear from the Turkish side of the story. We go live to our central London studio and the Turkish journalist Zafer Arapkili. Welcome to you. How will this ending of the siege, how will it be viewed in Turkey?
Well, I think Turkish Republic and all the Turkish population is watching and monitoring all these events very carefully. because there's always a fear that there is going to be a threat against Turkish targets from now on, mainly the Turkish embassies, Turkish consulates and other places which are associated with Turkey in the future. Indeed, I was just informed that the police, the security forces have advised the Turkish embassy being evacuated in case there's sort of threat or attack or an attempt to siege the Turkish embassy. And this morning there were reports that in northern London the Turkish newspapers were prevented from being distributed around London. Today nobody can sell Turkish newspapers because the Kurdish protesters have directed their anger against the Turkish media. Now I want to make something clear. I mean, I'm not representing the Turkish government or any Turkish official organization here. I'm a Turkish journalist representing a Turkish newspaper and a TV channel here. There is a danger that we detect in the Western public opinion and notably in the British media during the recent days. Of course, it's understandable that the Kurdish people are psychologically emotional about their leader being arrested and put on trial in Turkey. And of course, given that there are some concerns about whether he's going to get a fair trial or not in Turkey, of course, they have the right to protest because this is a democratic world. But of course, there is a danger that Turkish Republic, is going to be made a scapegoat within this context. And I sense a feeling of prejudice and bias against the Turkish Republic that the Turks are not going to trial Mr. Öcalan fairly.
Well, indeed, and that is one of the things that the protesters want, isn't it? One of the things that they understand that the Western governments have promised they will press Turkey for, and that's a fair trial for Öcalan. Do you believe, can you guarantee that that will happen?
Well, of course, no one can guarantee anything, and I'm not in the position to guarantee on behalf of the Turkish Republic. Indeed, the Turkish media, including the organizations that I'm working for, have been critical of some of the miscarriages of justice and treatment of human rights activists and people defending the Kurdish cause in Turkey. And there have been miscarriages of justice, just like in any other country, like the United Kingdom, France. These are monitored all around the world. Let's not forget one thing. Turkey...
I don't want to interrupt you, but just on that point of monitoring, that is one of the key points, isn't it? Just to clear up this idea of a free and fair trial that you want to make clear that Öcalan will get. One of the key things they want is they want it to be monitored. They want Öcalan's lawyers to be able to get access to him and doctors to get access to him. Is that something that will be happening soon?
Well, I'm sure that will be happening soon, but let's not confuse two things. Turkey is a sovereign country, and Turkey is indeed a part of the democratic world, and Turkey has independent courts. I mean, at the end, people can judge the judgment of the courts, the decision of the courts, whether being fair or unfair. But during the trial, the Turkish courts are indeed capable of trying somebody. And of course, being a part of the democratic world, Turkey is under scrutiny and open to scrutiny from all international organizations because trials are made in the open, in public. Let's not forget, a couple of months ago, last year, the second man in the PKK, Mr. Şemdin Sakık, was captured by the Turkish forces in northern Iraq, brought to Turkey, and is still being tried in the open. International observers, United Nations, European Court of Human Rights, the Western media, like all the other international organizations, are quite welcome in Turkey to see what's happening and to judge at the end according to what sort of punishment given, or if any punishment is going to be given to Öcalan. But let's not forget that nobody has the right to demand from Turkey that, or to tell from Turkey that you cannot try this man, give it to somebody else or in the international organization.
Zafer Arapkili, stay with us, and you made your point very well. I just want to return to the scene outside the embassy for the moment and listen to the crowd. We're expecting maybe some kind of statement to be made. A picture of Öcalan is being held up along with roses and victory shouts. People gathered around. Police obviously holding some people back, but we do think that maybe... Let's just hear what's being said. Emma is watching that from the ground there. Emma, we almost seemed as though some sort of statement is about to be made. Is that what you're expecting?
If I can just explain what I'm seeing, Anne Clwyd MP actually walked into the crowd with a few police officers. So I suspect it is her talking to the crowd there. That is why we're seeing so many cameras around her. Maybe she is about to try to speak over the megaphone there. But certainly she's made it clear that she wanted to go among the protesters and chat to them. So that is perhaps what we're seeing there. That is why we're seeing so much interest in that part of the crowd.
She was speaking to Sky News, wasn't she, and saying that she was keen that the best possible situation will be found, the best possible outcome for those who've been led out of the embassy. Do you think it's possible she might be trying to reassure the crowd there that she's doing her best for that?
Yes, I think she's really here to say that you're not being ignored. You know, I'm an MP and I'm making sure that your cause is being taken to the British government. Whether she can offer them any guarantees, we don't know. But certainly she's here as a representative of the British Parliament to say that we take your cause on board. She herself is a supporter of their cause, and indeed we are listening to you.
Well, just as we watch that go on, I think we're also joined by a second Turkish viewpoint on all of this, another journalist, Bulletins Isla. We're watching the scene, Oval, of people gathering, a picture of Öcalan being held up, roses, cheers and victory shouts going on. How do you think a scene like this would be viewed in Turkey itself?
Sorry, I can't hear the last word.
I was saying, how do you think the scene, the peaceful ending and some of the victory shouts, how do you think that would be viewed in Turkey itself?
Well, yes. As far as I'm concerned, of course, the peaceful solution is to fund it. And, of course, also the British police approach, the softly approach should be appreciated.
Over, I apologise, we will return to you. I must just interrupt to go to Chris Roberts, who's got a vantage point on the rooftops in one of our memory cameras around the embassy. We seem to be appearing to see buses pulling away, Chris.
Yes, this seems to be this entire sorry episode entering its final stages now. The protesters, some 70-odd of them, who've been brought out of the embassy and brought onto the buses you can see in front of me. 4, there's a 5th one just pulling up behind now. They're now coming out with an escort of, my word, at least a dozen police vehicles. Obviously, the protesters were separated into groups of around about a dozen in each coach. It's a standard security measure. There's never been any question of any danger to the police, but it's just standard operational measure that people are divided so they can be controlled, obviously, in case something does happen. They're just pulling out now in front of me, blue lights flashing, as you can see, a line of 5 coaches, which will be taken, we think, to at least one local police station, Charing Cross, where those on board will be questioned under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Obviously a very serious issue, much as the supporters who've been here for the past 3 days were hoping, very unrealistically of course, that these people would be released very quickly. They're not going to be. They're going to be questioned. They're handcuffed at the moment on board the coaches. And we'll see what happens after that. The entire issue of charges is still to be decided.
And do we presume that this means that all people that are going to come out have now done so?
I assume so, yes. I can't imagine they'd leave without everybody who was holding that embassy actually coming out and being secured by the police. So I can see just actually where the embassy is, a team of fire officers who are about to enter the building. There was some suggestion at one point that petrol or some kind of fuel had been doused around the building. Nobody ever managed to confirm that, but they're entering just to check the building is safe. I'm not suggesting, of course, that there's been any kind of booby trapping by the protesters. It's always been a very peaceful demonstration, despite the fact that it involved a very high-profile criminal act. But obviously the police and fire emergency services are taking every precaution before allowing embassy staff back inside that building.
Indeed, and as you touched on, the charges under the Prevention of Terrorism Act are no small charges, are they?
Absolutely. There obviously are a number of sections to it, and we've no idea what, if anything, these people will be charged with. but essentially they've illegally occupied a building for the past 3 days, a building that is the sovereign territory of another country. The Turkish authorities, of course, have branded all supporters of the PKK and members, the organisation these people support, as terrorists. And I suppose the Turks at least will be happy to see them arrested and possibly charged with the word terrorism attached to it. But we'll have to wait and see what happens after the questioning that will begin, obviously, within the next few minutes or hours.
We just saw Anne Clwyd MP there just leaving the scene, having spoken to some of the protesters. Still cheers, scarves being waved, and a picture of her being held high. No sign that this is disappearing or dissipating, is there?
No, but I don't think they're going to be here much longer. It was said when it became clear earlier this morning that this looked as if it was going to come to a peaceful resolution this afternoon. We were told that once the demonstrators came out and were taken away, the mass of supporters who've been here for the past 3 days would begin dispersing. And they're obviously disappointed that none of the protesters who held the building for the past 3 days were allowed to come down and make some kind of statement. That possibly was unrealistic from the word go. Those who've been leading the campaign here over the past 3 days will now be talking possibly some kind of address made to those supporters you can hear in the background. And I suspect they'll be out of here within the next hour or so. They've achieved what they came here to do. The world's attention has been focused on the plight of Kurdistan. Possibly they want sympathy and support for the way they've conducted themselves.
Chris, for the moment, thank you. Let's return now to Bulletin's Isla, who joins us on the line, a Turkish journalist. You were just beginning to tell us how you believed that this scene might be being played out in Turkey, how it would be received there.
Well, to be honest, I haven't contracted yet. I mean, what kind of the reaction my counterparts in Turkey or Turkish public. But as I explained, as far as I'm concerned, the way ended, it's a very, very happy end, actually. Especially the peaceful solution found to the siege. That's why I appreciated the British police approach, the softness of the approach. But yes.
No, I think many British people would perhaps be surprised by the passion involved in this Kurdish protest. Would there be the same surprise in Turkey?
Yeah, could be. The most important that's there was no violence, because we in Turkey experienced the PKK supported the demonstrations or the siege on our soils, never ended like that, and always ends with the clashes with the police, and or the burning down the building. And this happened in the European countries, the PKK supporters, what they done last 3 days. That's why I'm surprised the siege ended peacefully.
Bulletin, thank you very much. We're also joined by Barry Atwan, editor of Middle East magazine. Al-Quds joins us now. Were you surprised that this ended as peacefully as it did?
Actually, I'm not surprised at all for two reasons. First, the British police well experienced. They gained a tremendous experience of negotiating with hostage takers. They gained it from 1980 when the Iranian embassy was stormed, and the saga continued for about 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks. The second thing, Britain is not involved or accused by the Kurdish movement that they participated in extradition or arrest of Öcalan and surrender him to Turkey. So for two reasons, as I said, the experience of the British police, and second thing, because Britain was neutral in the whole saga. So definitely hostage taker appreciated that, and they were cooperative with the police.
Indeed, and as we see the scene, people being cleared away, people being moved back, those inside the embassy now being taken away, some we think at least to Charing Cross police station. As we look at that scene, I think it's worth reiterating why this all happened in the Greek embassy, why it's not at the Turkish embassy, why is it at the Greek embassy?
A Greek embassy because it was a soft target. The Turkish embassy is a fortress, actually. It's well guarded, and the Kurds demonstrated many times before. Then they knew that they cannot storm the embassy. It's well equipped to counter them. Second thing, Greek was involved in extradition of Öcalan to Turkey, and the Kurds believe they were betrayed by the Greek authorities, Greek government, because they consider it as a lie against Turkey. But suddenly, there was shift of allegiances, from being allied to the Kurds, to surrender their most prominent leader. So I think the sense of betrayal was the reason why they stormed the Greek embassy.
And as we feel perhaps some relief that this siege has ended peacefully, we of course look to the days and the weeks and what is to come. And you've touched on there already one international repercussion of this, and that is the relationship between Greece and Turkey. We've seen 3 Greek ministers already lose their jobs today, resign. Where does that leave their relationship?
Definitely, I don't think it will improve the relationship in the long run. Maybe in the short term, yes, there will be some sort of reconciliation between Turkey and Greece. But then the problem is, many Greek politicians actually will be heavily criticized by the Greek public because they couldn't expect, the government to cooperate and coordinate with Turkey and surrender one of the Greek ally, who is Abdullah Öcalan. So I think it will have definitely a lot of repercussion internally in Greek, and I'm not surprised. It will start now a lot of problems inside the Greek politics, and many politicians will lose their job, will lose their party. Maybe they will lose the government. The whole government will collapse.
Okay, well, that's one repercussion. As we look at these protesters waving flags, they consider they've had some victory, if only that they've got their cause world publicity.
Yes.
But what's going to happen over the days and weeks when they watch Öcalan's trial, do you think?
Actually, now we have to look at many things at the same time. First, we have to look at the Kurdish-Israeli relationship. I believe those Kurdish groups, and definitely will be a very radical extremist group, and definitely they will take revenge from the Israeli embassies, from the Israeli cooperation, as they say it, with the Kurdish government in extraditing Öcalan. So, and also because 3 Kurds were killed when the Israeli guards shot dead those demonstrators. This is one thing. Second thing, I believe also there will be more splinter groups inside the Kurdish movements, which very radicals, and definitely they will prove that Öcalan arrested, but we will continue the struggle, we will continue the fight against Turkish government. So I'm not surprised that there will be more problems in the near future.
So looking at that movement then, Öcalan's been arrested. He's clearly evokes very passionate feelings among the Kurds, but is he alone? Does he have strong lieutenants around him who can keep up the fight? I mean, what's left now of that movement?
He's a symbol of the Kurdish people, exactly like Arafat as a symbol of the Palestinian people. So he represents a whole nation, about 18 million of them. So definitely his people wouldn't leave it alone. They definitely will create a lot of trouble in order to either to release him or to guarantee a fair trial. But seeing the way he was extradited, actually he was kidnapped. So this really doesn't give indications that it will be a fair trial, because the procedure, legal procedure in his surrender didn't take place. It was exactly a kidnap thing. And I don't believe the Kurdish people will stomach that. And
So,
definitely they will be very better about it.
I mean, what would they want to see to accept it was a fair trial?
Actually, definitely any trial wouldn't actually convince them it is a fair trial, because he is their beloved leader, and he was humiliated. He was, put in the box, and we have seen him in the airplane when he was transferred from Kenya to Ankara. It was very humiliating for them. I don't believe they will stomach this humiliation, and definitely they will try to defend their pride as a nation and as a people, and by taking actions maybe against the American, because the American accused of being involved, the CIA in particular, in surrendering him or arresting him and giving him back to Turkey. So I think, maybe the Turkish government gained a victory, but I believe it will be a short-lived victory. It's true, they solved the problem of their pride. They arrested the man who was the most wanted man for them, but they didn't solve the Kurdish problems. The Kurdish problem is still there, and the suffering of Kurdish people is still there. And this kind of thing, you have to deal with it in political terms, giving them more freedom, self-rule, recognize their identity. But without that, I think the problem will continue. And I believe, as I said, the danger is a splinter group from the Kurdish people could emerge now and start to be very radical and very lethal in their attacks against the Kurdish government, the Turkish government, and maybe other governments like American who are accused of participating in this saga.
And of course, what we shouldn't forget, while we look at the Kurdish cause and the Kurdish people's standpoint, what we shouldn't forget is, from the Turkish government's point of view, this is a man who they see as responsible for 29,000 people's deaths.
Oh yes, this is true, but also the Turkish government killed, thousands of Kurds and massacred them. They used all kinds of weapons and bombs to kill them. So it is, two-way traffic. We can't just take it from the Turkish government or from the Kurdish government. It is a political problem. It's part of Middle Eastern problems, actually. And now Middle East, which is the most volatile region, had, a new one. and this could be, shake the very fragile stability of that region, which is extremely important for the whole international community.
Well, let's just briefly return to Emma Heard, who's, as we've been seeing pictures outside the Greek embassy. Let's just talk to Emma there. Emma, is there any sign of things winding down there at all, of people dispersing?
No, none at all actually, Kate. They seem to be enjoying their moment. Lots of flag waving. You can see them holding up a picture of their leader, Abdullah Öcalan, who started this whole protest, whose arrest sparked this whole thing off. They seem determined to certainly stay for the moment. I think we may in fact see them here for many hours yet. There really is a feeling of togetherness here, coming together as a community. I'm sure many of these people haven't met each other before today, and they're talking, they're discussing things, they're finding common ground. So really what started off as a protest has now become something of a celebration and almost a social occasion for them.
I suppose there must be some concern from police. I wonder what preparations they've made, because with feelings running high, what's going to happen to these people? Will they just are they expecting them to just disappear and go home, or what are they going to do? They may want to continue.
I think the police are hoping that now these protesters have lost the focal point of their demonstration, which was the embassy and the siege of the embassy, that gradually they will begin to disappear. What's interesting is there was a line of riot police behind a line of uniformed officers, behind a barricade which is keeping the crowd of people you can see in one place. The riot police have gone, they've moved back. What we see now are a line of uniformed officers, many of them smiling. Really, this is softly policing. They're not going to make any move to move these people on using any force. They will hope that they will drift off as the evening goes on.
And one wonders what the ordinary residents of Holland Park, who normally have very different events going on in their road, what they've made of this. They must be relieved things have ended so peacefully.
Yes, Richard Branson in fact lives in the same road, and I'm sure that he'll be relieved. A lot of the people around here have been saying that it's very noisy. Certainly the protesters arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning in the early hours of Tuesday morning, and they've been here ever since, chanting, singing, dancing, and clearly the police presence has caused some disruption too. Roads have had to be closed. Really, this is an exclusive part of West London, one of the most expensive areas in London to live, and I'm sure the people here will be very relieved. But having said that, you've seen the residents moving out of their homes trying to pick their way among the Kurdish protesters, and really the atmosphere has been very good. There's been no animosity between the residents here and the protesters. Really, some of them have been trying to talk to them to try to understand why they're protesting. Many people don't understand the issue which they're so concerned about. Some of the residents I spoke to yesterday had actually come along, walked 5 minutes down the road, especially to talk to the protesters, to find out what they were here for. So I think a great deal of disruption for the residents, a great deal of relief, but really no animosity.
Thanks, Emma, for the moment. Let's return now to Zafer Arapkili, a Turkish journalist who's in our London studio. We were speaking to you earlier, Zafer, and it has been raised that even though the Turkish government has Öcalan and he can bring him to trial, this may only be the start of the problems. This may have only exaggerated the problems, because they're by no means any closer to resolving the Kurdish problem.
That's quite correct, because capturing the leader of an organization that Turkish forces have been fighting for the past 15 years and putting him on trial and indeed giving him some sort of punishment, even if they hang him, the problem will not be over. The problem is just starting now, as some other analysts have put in the past, because it is not only a problem of terror. It's not only a problem of armed conflict. It's a problem which has roots deep in the history of the region. So Turkey has to do everything possible, first to secure its borders, secure its stability and security, and then, of course, trying to find a political and long-lasting solution to this problem. And of course, that's where the importance of the Western forces and Western pressure is involved. Western countries would and should accept that Turkey is part of this democratic world, and it should be given every possible help in solving this problem. And this can only be done not by confronting Turkey and criticizing every move that Turkey makes, such as the Western media and Western governments are just almost accused.
I don't think Western media are necessarily, certainly not Sky News, criticizing every move the Turkish government makes, but one of the points that the Kurds make is that they would like to open negotiations to try and find a political settlement that you've said that Turkey wants. Do you think that's more or less likely since the arrest of Öcalan and the siege and the protests we've seen now?
I think Turkish government and everybody in Turkey who has some sense of responsibility is ready to sit down and think again how we can handle this problem.
Sit down with those from the Kurdish movement, perhaps not the PKK, who I know the Turkish government considers to be a guerrilla terrorist movement, but sit down with those who represent the feeling of ordinary Kurdish people. Turkish government's ready to do that, are they?
I think the Turkish government and every responsible Turkish politician should consider doing that and sit down with people who are against terror, who are against violence, but only take this cause up as a political case. I think Turkey should do that, and that's the only way possible to come out of this problem. Otherwise, in the future, if you arrest and try or punish Abdullah Öcalan, new Öcalans will come out, new fighters will come out, and this problem will go on and on, and 30,000 more people can die in the future. And this is not the end to. This is not the way to end any problem.
And since Öcalan's arrest, as you touched on there, you said even if they execute him, which is the punishment that is open to them if he were to be found guilty after a long and fair trial, you say even if that happens, it doesn't solve the problem. But some have been suggested, in fact, that might make it worse, because to the people that we see celebrating who feel such great passion for him, there'd be a danger they might make him a martyr.
Well, of course, it's a matter for the courts, it's a matter for the people who try him, because as everybody knows, I mean, he has a long list of things that he is accused with. I mean, he's kept responsible from all those lives that are lost from both sides. Of course, it's a matter for the courts. I mean, nobody can...
But would that be something that you would believe that the Turkish government would bear in mind, would have in the front of their minds as a concern?
Well, of course, the Turkish government should bear that in their minds, and I'm sure they are keeping them in mind. But of course, on the other hand, the Turkish government is formed of politicians. I mean, politicians also have to listen to the voice of the people, listen to the concerns of the people, and listen to the psychology of the people, because there are millions of people out there in Turkey who would like to have Mr. Öcalan being punished in the most severe way possible, because there are a lot of Turkish people also died in the conflict. But what is important is that everybody should remember that ending this problem is not only possible by legal or military means.
Talking needs to start as well. Safa Arabkili, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure the talking is only just beginning, because of course there's still a big international dimension to the Kurdish protests. Earlier today, the Greek Foreign Minister, Pangalos, resigned amid allegations of mishandling of the incident. Protesters have started a sit-in at the UN building in Vienna, and there's widespread speculation still about events surrounding the capture of Abdullah Öcalan, and Turkish troops have pushed more than 9 miles into northern Iraq to attack Kurdish guerrilla hideouts. Gary Lloyd has this report.
On his way to an island prison, while outraged Kurds watched on television, Turkey triumphantly continued to release pictures of the capture of the rebel Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan. Footage of his seizure from Kenya by masked commandos provoked Kurds to assault Israel's consulate in Germany yesterday in the belief that the Israeli Secret Service was involved, and resulted in 3 Kurds being shot dead. In an operation planned to coincide with Öcalan's arrest, Turkish troops advanced into the Kurdish-held enclave in northern Iraq. Aided by a Kurdish militia which supports Turkey, they mounted an attack on Öcalan's PKK guerrillas. The army said the operation was timed to strike a blow while the rebels were demoralized by Öcalan's capture. Greece, which sheltered Öcalan at its embassy in Kenya, has borne the brunt of Kurdish anger. Kurds suspect Greek complicity in his capture. And now the Greek Foreign Minister, Theodoros Pangalos, who denied involvement, has resigned. He's been accused of mishandling the affair. The Public Order and Interior Ministers have also resigned. Germany has suffered some of the worst Kurdish reaction, with attacks on consulates of countries suspected of involvement in Öcalan's arrest. Germany has a population of over 500,000 Kurds and 2 million Turks. Kurds have now begun attacking Turkish travel agencies and businesses. The German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder has threatened to deport Kurds and Turks if they break the law. We will not tolerate on German streets political conflicts carried out which are foreign conflicts, he said. The Turkish embassy in Ottawa has become the latest target of Kurdish outrage over Öcalan's seizure. Hundreds of protesters confronted riot police and several were arrested. As protests continue, the Kurdish parliament in exile has called for the establishment of an international court to try Öcalan. Turkish courts, they say, are not independent. Gary Lloyd, Sky News.
Well, that's the scene outside the Greek embassy at the moment, while the chants and flag waving go on outside, from the protesters outside. We know that those inside have all been led away and bussed off to police stations, including Charing Cross, to face charges under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. That's the scene at the moment. But now, as far as police are concerned, the siege at the Greek embassy in London is over. Well, we'll have more on this and the rest of the day's news in just a moment.
This Sunday on Sky Premiere.
You guys are the Power Rangers?
The family film at 7.
Shift to the turbo.
Turbo, a Power Rangers movie.
At 9 o'clock on Film Night, I'll be looking at You've Got Mail with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, a kind of Sleepless in Seattle with email.
At 9:30, a Sky Premiere exclusive.
My brother used to torture me.
Andrew McCarthy, Rosanna Arquette, Elizabeth Perkins. The first British screening of I'm Losing You.
I want to go somewhere hot and windy and weird.
This Sunday night on Sky Premiere.
In a spin about private health insurance? Then for straightforward advice, call Prime Health on 0800 251 261 for free.
The Parthenon, the temple of the great goddess Pallas Athena. Inspired by the harmony of its proportions and the refinement of its structure, Greek master goldsmith Stergios Vassilou has created a piece of jewelry worthy of a goddess. The Pallas Athena ring, exclusively available from the Art Gallery. A classical dream transformed into reality, breathtaking in its beauty. With dazzling diamonds set in 18-karat white gold, this is a ring of perfect design, as eternal as the treasures of ancient Greece. Call 0800 597 1602 now for a free information pack giving details of how to examine this wonderful ring in your own home for 14 days without risk. The Pallas Athena ring can be yours for an exceptional price and comes with a guarantee of authenticity from a laboratory of precious stones. Remember, there's no obligation, so to find out more about the Pallas Athena ring, call the Art Gallery now on 0800 597 1602.
Next time you buy pork, pick up the pork with the new mark of distinction.
Now you can communicate any way you want. By fax and email, internet and phone. All with the pocket-sized Nokia communicator. And now you can even communicate with pictures. Take a digital photo on a separate camera, send or receive it with the Nokia communicator. It's an easier way to communicate. Nokia, connecting people.
It feels good. Spending the money with a personal loan from Northern Rock. A £5,000 loan could cost you under £81 a month. For details, phone 0845 122 1000 and talk to Northern Rock direct.
Lurpak Spreadable. Smoother by half.
Hello, I'm Bob Friend. On today's programme, a peaceful end to the siege at the Greek embassy. But have the Kurd protesters achieved their aim? And moving the managerial goalposts, Kevin Keegan talks about his new part-time job. That's live at 5 at 5.
You're with Sky News. More on that peaceful ending to the siege of the Greek embassy in just a moment, because Mark Saggers is here with the sports news. Mark.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon to you. Kevin Keegan's been marking his first day as England coach by preparing for a match against Notts County. He took training with Second Division Fulham as always today. The FA have come under fire for appointing a part-time coach. Everybody will be talking at a news conference at 5:15.
Acting chairman, acting chief executive, and now an acting manager. The part-time appointment of Kevin Keegan has undoubtedly heaped yet more scorn on a beleaguered FA. The man himself didn't look too worried by all the fuss when he took charge of today's training session here in Roehampton. But whatever Keegan says at his press conference, the fact remains England are back to square one in desperate need of a new figurehead. The Fulham players preparing for Saturday's home clash with Notts County don't see it quite like that, of course. They're undeniably relieved that their chief operating officer kept his word.
Obviously it's tremendous news for everybody involved with Fulham. I'm not so sure it's such good news for the England fans, but it's great news for us, and it's one we're very happy with.
Ironically, Kevin Keegan remains the bookies' favourite to become full-time England manager at the end of the summer. But with the FA running out of candidates, that's surely just wishful thinking. Pete Barclay, Sky News, South West London.
Scotland have named their team for Saturday's Five Nations match against England. Alan Tate starts in the centre. He came on as a substitute during the win over Wales. Stuart Grimes is in for the injured Doddy Weir at lock. The only doubt is winger Cameron Murray, who has a touch of flu.
Few would have given Scotland a prayer in this Five Nations Championships, but 80 minutes against Wales at Murrayfield changed all that. The victory prompted a surge in morale north of the border, matched by a surge in optimism, tempered only by those who know what awaits at Twickenham.
I think there's an assumption by a lot of people in Scotland that we're just going to go down there and beat them. Well, we've been trying that for X number of years, and I think we've only beaten them 3 or 4 times, so that it'll take a tremendous effort even to match them.
Well, have saved his side there,
for the record, Scotland have only ever won 3 times at Twickenham in the last 60 years. In 1997 they went down 41-13. For Saturday, injuries mean that Stuart Grimes and Alan Tate step into the frame. Tate will start at outside centre. Grimes comes into the second row. The positional shake-up sees Gregor Townsend reverting to standoff, where he finished the game against the Welsh.
I think it's up to us to go down there with our game plan and try and imprint that into the game. I suppose England will be trying to do the same. It's like a game of chess, I suppose, and I suppose it'll be very, very physical chess.
You regard a victory as possible or impossible?
I regard it as possible. I think in any international match, considering they haven't played for 3 months and we actually played a fortnight ago, the fact that we are quite upbeat, although they're very formidable, I think that if we really get up at them and close down their space, as they say in rugby, then anything can happen.
It'll be Jim Telfer's last trip to Twickenham as Scotland coach. For him at least, it'll be a journey in search of the fondest farewell. James Matthews, Sky News at Murrayfield.
Scotland's Paul Lawrie has a 2-stroke lead at the halfway stage of the Qatar Masters. He had a 7 under par 65, finishes 11 under par. Søren Kledsen, the Dane, is 2 shots behind, along with Jean van der Velde and John Bickerton, who carded another hole-in-one today on the 13th. England A made hard work of today's one-day match against Zimbabwe. They still won by 4 wickets in Harare. Paul Franks took 4 for 34. The home side all out for 154. England 151 with 4 wickets and 10 overs in hand. And in Calcutta, India ended the 3rd day of the Asian Championship Test, 4 without loss in their second innings, needing 279 to win. Pakistan all out for 316. British interest is still very much alive in the World Indoor Tennis event at Rotterdam. Greg Rusedski will reach round 3 today if he beats the world number 174, Edwin Kempes. Tim Henman's already through with victory over the Czech Peter Korda. And if you think of oval motor racing tracks, Daytona or Indianapolis in the United States, probably the ones that spring to mind. What about in Northamptonshire? Well, at Corby, work will start shortly on a 300-acre site formerly occupied by British Steel, called the Rockingham Motor Speedway. It'll be the first new motor racing circuit in Britain since Brooklands was built in 1907. The track should be ready next year. That's your sport so far. Don't forget that press conference, 5:15.
No, we'll be waiting. Thanks very much indeed, Mark. While you're with Sky News, these are the main news headlines that you've been hearing. The Greek embassy siege is over. It ended just before 2:10 this afternoon after 3 days of tension. There was no violence as they left the building in Holland Park and were led by police to an awaiting coach. And in other news, an inquiry is underway at the North Staffordshire Hospital in Stoke-on-Trent after claims that parents weren't told their babies were being given experimental treatment. Kevin Keegan's been marking his first day as England coach by preparing for a match against Notts County. He